So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I'm really happy tonight to host the first webinar in a series of a few webinars that we have as part of our A New Hope program. And I'll speak more to what that is for those of you who may not be familiar with it here in the next few slides. But tonight we want to talk about thriving in a VCP family, life roles, and planning. And so we will be talking about a lot of these topics from the perspective or through the lens of a young adult. I will make that caveat here at the beginning. But I also want to acknowledge that even though I'll be addressing many of these topics through the lens of a young adult, a lot of what we discuss tonight is going to be applicable to yourself. If you're maybe outside of the age range of a young adult, but you're still in the VCP community, you're a giver, a caregiver, many of these topics may still be applicable to you. And so, I did want to bear that in mind as well. And so we're going to talk about some heavier topics tonight, but I hope that they're informative and that we'll have time for discussion and questions at the end. All right, and so just to give some background so that everyone knows where we're coming from about why the A New Hope program exists. And so Cure VCP Disease recognizes that VCP disease really impacts the whole family from an emotional, logistic, financial, and genetic standpoint, and even so much more. And so there are particular challenges that are unique to young adults and families with VCP disease, including planning for an uncertain future, feeling isolated or overwhelmed, supporting parents or loved ones. And there also can be financial and caregiving concerns, in addition to navigating decisions about genetic testing. And again, I'll say that these are some challenges that could be present for anyone in the VCP disease community, but are particularly heightened or unique, or have other unique considerations behind them for those who are also young adults. And so Cure VCP Disease came together to build this program called A New Hope Wellbeing and Rare that is not only built for young adults in the community, but it's also built with the young adults in this community. So we've had a good number of discussions, or I've had a good number of discussions with some of the young adults in this community, in addition to our kickoff call about 2 weeks ago, where we completed a survey. And so that survey is designed to help really make sure we're addressing the needs of these young adults who are participating in this program throughout the duration of the program and beyond, even the existence of this program. We want to make sure that Cure VCP Disease is really serving as a resource to its young adults in its community. And so it's a program that's designed to support these individuals and not just inform them. And so what's included in this program is a monthly support group, which is actually starting in May, only for young adults in the VCP community. We've also created an online community through a Discord server, and this is just a casual space for young adults in our community to chat, share resources, ask questions, hang out, or be bothered by my messages reminding them that webinars are happening. And so this is an online community limited just to those young adults. We will also have educational webinars such as this one tonight, and other topics of these webinars include potentially diagnosis, family planning, and other mental health considerations. And lastly, as part of a New Hope program, and some of you all may have attended a webinar about this a few months ago actually, is the option to participate in genetic counseling and testing through Cure VCP Disease's new partnership with Informed DNA. And so that is a resource that's available on the Cure VCP Disease website. If that's something you're interested in, that is optional, like it says here. It's not required for those participating in the A New Hope program, but it's also an option for others in our VCP disease community as well, if you're interested in genetic counseling and testing. So take a look at the genetic testing tab on the Cure VCP Disease website if you're interested in that. All right, and so that should catch everybody up about what A New Hope is, why we're here, some of the things we hope to accomplish. But the expectation for tonight's webinar is threefold. So I'd like to normalize the young adult experience in VCP disease families. I'd like to explore the roles, emotions, and planning in the face of uncertainty, the uncertainty that is VCP disease. And I'd like you all to leave with some takeaways But overall, I'd really like you all to leave feeling more seen, supported, and equipped. And I do also want to say that, while we're still learning a lot about the VCP experience in families and particularly for young adults, there's um, a lot that is well published, I guess, and understood about the experience in other neurodegenerative conditions like Huntington's disease. And so tonight's content will pull a lot from what we already know about the HD or Huntington's disease community as well. So I want to just properly acknowledge that community and give them thanks for the way they've kind of paved the way for understanding a lot of the implications of navigating a rare disease. And so first, let's just all start from, what do I mean when I say you're at risk for VCP disease? And I have to say, I wouldn't be doing my due diligence as a genetic counselor myself if I didn't just give one slide with some genetics in it. VCP disease in formal terms is an autosomal dominant condition. But this just means you have a genetic change, also known as a mutation or a variant, that is present in one of two copies of the VCP gene. So individuals have two copies of every gene. They get one copy from each parent. And so VCP disease is caused by mutations in only one of those genes. And so this means that individuals with VCP disease have a 50% chance of passing on this genetic change to each child. It also means individuals who are siblings to those with VCP disease have a 50% chance of also having the same genetic change. And so here, if you're more visual, here we can see that 50% chance of inheriting a mutation in the VCP gene as a result of someone who has it, who carries it. And genetic testing is the only conclusive way to diagnose VCP disease. Although there is reason for clinical concern for VCP disease, genetic testing is the only way to conclusively diagnose it. And so that's just the genetic aspect of it. But really, there's a lot more to the term at risk for VCP disease than just the genetics. And so maybe in terms that feel more familiar to you would be you're the family member of someone with VCP disease, and you may or may not know your genetic status. You may be someone who have participated in genetic testing, and you may not show symptoms yet of VCP disease, but you've already felt the impact of its presence, and feeling like you're living in this waiting space between health and possible illness. Other ways it might mean to be at risk for VCP disease include a lot of the uncertainty that comes from that waiting space. And so this uncertainty has the potential to result in an invisible burden, including fears about the future, a sense of urgency in life planning, particularly again for young adults with regards to education, relationships, and career. And also this invisible burden can result in quite a bit, or it can entail quite a bit of guilt, grief, and anticipatory loss. All of these being emotions that I'm sure you have kind of tackled with in your own life and in your own family. And maybe you didn't have quite a word to put to that emotion, but maybe these are some of the things that you're feeling. And this is all part of the risk, what we could consider the at risk for VCP disease and what goes along with that. And so we have a few, I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but we have a few poll questions that I'd like to have interspersed throughout this presentation. And so one of the things and this will be anonymous, but one of the things I want to ask of you all tonight is, do you consider yourself at risk for VCP disease? So for those of us who are here, for the first question, do you consider yourself at risk for VCP disease? It says about 83% of you answered yes, and 17% of you answered no. And so we are talking then definitely to the right crowd tonight. And so I hope that a lot of what we go through, has an impact on you, or spurs some additional thoughts, or maybe you find helpful. And so maybe I'm going to close these survey results and we can go through the rest of them maybe later with the additional questions.
Sure.
All right. So thanks everyone for answering that. And there, so when we talk about risk through the lens of a young adult in particular, as I've been alluding to, really has a potential to shape a lot of different aspects of life planning. And so the first one that comes to my mind is education. And so a question, these are just example questions, but there are many aspects to how being a young adult VCP disease care partner might impact someone's education. But one question might be, should I pick a shorter path? Should I even attend college? Should I attend college close to home? Should I go to a 2-year degree or for a 2-year degree versus 4-year degree? Should I even go to college? Is college something that's right for me? There are a lot of questions around education that can come up for um, a young adult care partner. After that, we start thinking about career, and so not only is it someone's experiential knowledge or their experience of observing their family member kind of battle with VCP disease and how that shifts their career. It also starts to shape how a young adult might think about their own career, and what if they can't do their chosen or perform their or work in their chosen career long term because of their potential disease status. Additionally, something else that might come to mind is relationships when we're talking about young adult care partners. And a question that might come to mind is it fair to date or have kids? I'm not saying that this is a question that should come to your mind, but it's a common worry or theme that I've heard just in my experience as a genetic counselor working with young adults in the autosomal dominant disease space. And lastly, location. And so location of where to live. I already talked about location of education, but location of where to live long term. And a question that might come to mind is, should I live near my family in case they need help? Am I okay to live 20 minutes away, or am I okay to live 2 hours away, or should I live 20 minutes away? And maybe there's a better, and all of these options are just, or all of these um, aspects of how risk shapes life planning are listed kind of linearly here or in one straight line, but really it's really more of a mesh. And everything is quite intertwined where, one aspect of life planning as a young adult can really impact the other, right? The location might determine your career or your education. And so, and maybe your choice of partner, the dating pool, right? So all of this is a large mesh. And again, this might be something retrospectively, if you're thinking about in the past, your experience with VCP disease, you might be seeing how, this disease shaped your education, career, relationships, or your chosen living location in the past as well. But there are unique considerations for those who are young adults. And so my next question, which we already answered, was which area of life feels most shaped by VCP disease related uncertainty right now? And so I don't know, Brandon, is it possible to display those survey results again, or is that a one-time thing? There we go.
Yeah. Is it showing on your end?
Yes, so I can
Perfect.
narrate that. So it looks like um, relationships and family planning, well, it's tied with all of the above for the area of life that feels most shaped by VCP related uncertainty. So all of the above encompassing my health and body, where I live, relationships and family planning, and school or work, with others being also concerned about school and work. And so we can see here the concerns and risk of VCP disease really spans multiple areas of life for all of you all here tonight. All right, and so if we then think about if we continue to think about caregiving as a young adult in a VCP family, I want to acknowledge that many young adults are caregivers and sometimes without realizing it, because there's a lot more to the term caregiving, as I'm sure you all are well familiar with, than what maybe the term initially might suggest. And so caregiving can look like managing appointments or medications, providing emotional support, helping with mobility, memory, or mood, keeping family routines and family traditions going, and being the strong one emotionally. And again, these are, aspects of what caregiving may look like for any individual in a VCP family, but might go unrecognized as someone who is a young adult in a VCP family. And this could have been some of these caregiving activities could have been, activities that were performed even before what we would say, say the start of young adulthood is 18. So maybe, even as someone who's much younger, depending on how VCP disease looks like in your family, maybe, someone was helping with some of these caregiving tasks from a much younger age as well. And so the next question here I asked was, do you currently help care for a family member with VCP disease? And I should have taken a peek last time we put up the poll, because that was just a yes or no question, I think. If you don't mind putting that back up, Brandon. All right. And
Is
so
it showing?
yep, it's showing. And so it looks like about 80% of you in some form or fashion help with care for a family member with VCP disease, whether that's on a regular basis or of a more informal basis. 80% of you do help care for a family member, with about 20% of you saying, no, not right now. But that doesn't mean you haven't ever and won't ever. But still, I hope this is offering insight for you here tonight. All right. And so as we've talked about the caregiving landscape, there's also an emotional landscape that goes behind this, especially for young adults and how identity formation happens. Again, it's that mesh, that kind of that web of responsibilities and impact. And so some of the aspects on how a caregiving might affect anyone's identity, but particularly those of young adults, includes feeling responsible for others' well-being. I alluded to this earlier in making quote unquote adult decisions early. Maybe you have to make, decisions about your education or finances earlier than your counterparts or your other peers. Additional emotional considerations include guilt when choosing yourself, because you are often, in the place of putting others before yourself. And so while this can result in resilience and empathy, which are both very strong characteristics and admirable characteristics of anyone, this emotional kind of roller coaster can also result in burnout and isolation as well. I also want to take time to acknowledge that as a young adult who may have had to make these adult decisions early, like we've mentioned, there may be the complex feeling of grief that comes along with kind of grieving the parent-child relationship dynamic, and how that might, one, in the current moment, look very different compared to your peers, but also how it has looked different, maybe even earlier than what you're realizing. Maybe the parent-child relationship dynamic really has looked different your whole life, or for a good portion of it, or you're adapting to how it's currently changing and will continue to change. And that can play a large part in the identity formation of a young adult. And lastly, as the individuals are learning about their risk for VCP disease and kind of trying to decide if genetic testing is right for them, or is VCP, or even really before deciding about genetic testing, just thinking about, VCP disease in a family, oftentimes thoughts like, or reflections like, this could be me come to mind. And that is a normal thought and a normal consideration that comes to any individual's mind who's in a rare disease family. But it particularly impacts, like we talked about earlier, a lot of those, those different aspects of being a young adult, like education, career, location of where you live, things like that. And so again, this is another thing that's listed here, kind of in a line, but really this is all a large mesh or network or web that really impacts a young adult's identity formation. And so in the web that is VCP disease, I wanted to equip you all maybe with some ideas for planning with purpose, even in the face of uncertainty of VCP disease. And so before I put up kind of my hierarchy of planning, I want to just put this note here that I encourage you to start small and remember that you can take this one step at a time, even a half a step at a time, a crawling step at a time, right? At whatever pace feels comfortable for you. These are just ideas and thoughts and considerations, because sometimes when we plan, it can reignite kind of a feeling of control that can be very empowering for many individuals. And so these are just suggestions, but I wanted to put this up to remind us from the get-go to start small and to take things one step at a time. And so they are going to display all at once. I couldn't quite figure out my transition, but I did want to put this as a pyramid and with support being at the bottom. And so one way that you can really set yourself up for success in the future, and this just is life in general, but particularly success in life with VCP disease, is support and establishing your support network and setting boundaries to really create space for your own growth and build your community. And so I know I'm throwing in these different topics I will talk through. I'm throwing a lot of ideas at you. And so through the A New Hope program, we hope to equip you all with tools in each of these realms or tools that you might find helpful in each of these realms. But these are just overall, I guess, topics and things to think about. But first, I would really encourage you to make sure that you set yourself up with finding your community and finding support, and then moving on up the pyramid. And so another way in the medical realm that you can think about planning with purpose is knowing your family history, keeping up with your own checkups and symptom monitoring. And this is something as a genetic counselor, I would advocate for anyone, not just someone in a VCP family, but that's important for anyone. Staying informed, and you can also stay informed about treatment advances in the VCP disease space. And so kind of once you've got, a, a, a good idea of those, you can move on to the maybe less fun, more complex considerations that go along with planning. And these, again, I want to acknowledge might feel out of line compared to your peers, particularly if you're a young adult. Maybe some young adults aren't thinking about some of these considerations in the financial or legal realm. And so I recognize that does add an additional complexity and consideration to, the whole web that you're dealing with. But some financial ways that you could think about planning would be making sure you have enough savings. And that's something, again, that would be good for anyone to think about. But having enough savings in this case for if you do have to take off time from work or time from school to help support your family, or maybe it's savings for in the future if you're the way VCP disease impacts your life in the future, you've set yourself up to have savings to be able to navigate that without the stress of finances over your head. Something else in the financial realm that I know is a little complex and we don't quite get into today, but is disability insurance. And I recognize that's complex when we talk about disability insurance, particularly in the era of genetic testing. But this is something, and we can talk more about this, but disability insurance could be something that would be good to have in place before participating in genetic testing as someone in a VCP family. Because unfortunately, as you all might know, there is a law in place called the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act that does protect individuals from discrimination on the basis of personal or family genetic testing results in the areas of employment and health insurance, but unfortunately it does not protect individuals against discrimination based on those genetic testing results in the space of disability insurance, long-term disability insurance, and there are 3 categories, and it is escaping my mind right now. Long-term care disability, those are at least 2 of them. I'm not doing my due diligence here. I'll have to pull that up, but there are some protections it lacks. It also doesn't, unfortunately, protect individuals from discrimination who are working for the federal government, for the military, or who work for a small employer with less than 15 employees. And so there are unique considerations there, but sometimes having disability insurance set up before participating in genetic testing, life insurance, that was the other one, it doesn't protect you against. And so sometimes having those things in place or thinking about them before participating in genetic testing can be helpful. Something else in the financial, or a few other things in the financial realm that you might want to think about are work flexibility, how your career might be flexible with your potential disease status or VCP disease status, and how that might change, or how it could change if you're a care partner, and budgeting, which we talked about with savings. And lastly, again, and some of this might be, uh, you know, again, out of line with what your peers as young adults have thought about, but there are different ways that you can legally set yourself up for success that might leave you feeling a little more empowered, including considering advanced directives, a healthcare proxy, or even having power of attorney conversations for yourself or for a family member. And so those are different things that you can think about. And so these are, again, all ideas of ways that you could plan with purpose, even in the face of uncertainty. And we will hope to provide more resources throughout the A New Hope program to address a lot of these. And so I guess now that I speak about all the things that you can do, you might feel your heartbeat racing a little bit. I know I would, just because this is a lot to think about, and when you're already thinking about a lot. And I think that that is made evident by, some of the folks who are in our VCP community. And so in some of my interactions with our young adults, I have heard that some feedback, and I wanted to share with you all that really might be insightful for some of you when considering the young adult perspective, and how this web and planning with purpose might be overwhelming. And so someone in the VCP community, a young adult, shared, I have anxiety about having the disease myself or one of my siblings getting it later in life. I want to live my life, and I don't want to have to plan, even though I should. And so I think that this quote really illustrates how there's a large emotional aspect here to VCP disease, and how that integrates with planning and impacts identity development and life further on down the road. And so that brings us to the emotional side of planning. And I don't want to ignore this in any capacity, in that, right, I just spoke to maybe your heart rate was raising when we're talking about all these things you could do, but there's a lot of emotions that you might be feeling right now. And so you might feel like planning is too scary, and everything I just mentioned to you is just too much and too scary to even start considering right now. And that is normal, and that is okay. A lot of these things are scary to think about and to start planning for in general, much less when you put them into the web of VCP disease. You might also feel like in considering planning some of these things that you're being quote unquote too negative or pessimistic. But I would want to encourage you in saying that's not the case. You're trying to set your future self up and your family up for success, and making sure that you have the community and the resources to really feel empowered yourself. You might also feel, like I've already mentioned, kind of the urgency to prepare everything now. But remember that, like I said at the beginning, just to take everything one step at a time. Not everything happens overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, like they say. And so as much as I know that these things can be helpful to think about when I talk about planning with purpose, there is not urgency to do anything and everything or everything right now. But lastly, I will say that if you start to tackle these things in small steps, you might also feel some relief or a sense of empowerment when you do take control of some of these, which is why I do mention them. And so a couple reminders here in all of this in all of this planning, and to kind of combat some of these emotions that might come up as you're planning and trying to set yourself up for success is make sure you take breaks and give yourself grace. Prioritize joy and flexibility and revisit things as you grow. And I know a lot of these things. I acknowledge that a lot of these things are easier said than done. But if you can take a break, if you feel like you're not making any progress in trying to figure out your savings, then take a break. It doesn't have to be figured out right now. You don't have to figure out your 50-year savings plan right now, but take a break and give yourself grace that this is a process and these are just tools and ways that you can equip yourself for the future, but it doesn't have to happen overnight. And that ultimately your joy and your sense of peace is more important. And so don't let this planning take any of that from you, because you can always revisit things as you grow, as opportunities change, as you learn more. And so those are just some reminders I wanted to put up here on the left as well. And that all of this is normal. And so I think the last question I asked in the poll earlier was where do you feel the need? Where do you need the most support right now? And so overwhelmingly, 60% of you all said building community. And so I will say, you're doing a great job at starting that by joining us here tonight. And we'll talk about the end other ways that you can build community as well. But another few of you were also feeling like you needed support in both the financial and legal realm, and not so much in the medical realm. So that's great that you guys feel equipped there in the medical realm. And so again, through our programming in A New Hope, we'll try to address these needs. And I hope that, which is launching A New Hope, that we've at least started to help you build that community. All right. And so when we think about the emotional side of planning, like I just did, I wanted to pull up this emotional journey map that's published and put together by an organization called Rare Givers. I would also encourage you to check out their website in general. They have a lot of really valuable resources for rare families in general. One of them being this emotional journey map. And it reviews the everyday stressors that you all might experience, but also stressors that are more long-term than just every day, or more frequently experienced than, or maybe, sorry, sometimes you can experience it on an everyday, maybe it's a monthly basis, yearly basis, sometimes it's a cycle, so sometimes these things might change. And so I did want to just draw this to your attention. I'll give you a second to look at it. But these are all stressors that any rare giver might feel, but particularly now tonight, we're talking about young adult caregivers or care partners. And so you might notice some changes in your loved one. There's an adaptation period, kind of adjusting to a positive or negative diagnosis. There can be a shift in responsibilities. There might be a requirement for full-time care, conversations about end of life. You might be grappling with finding meaning. And so I, again, wanted to put this up here for you to see. But really what I want to focus on tonight, now that we've talked about so many emotional things, is this top right corner here, where we see the sun that's labeled with relief and the different tools that are highlighted underneath that. So ways that you can find relief from the stressors that would be a rare disease journey. Could include engaging community resources like our webinar here tonight, making sure you have self-care in place or you're participating in skill building, something that you enjoy. You can participate in counseling and therapy, find other forms of emotional support in a friend or a community network, staying connected socially. Others might find relief in participating in physical activity, mindfulness, prioritizing nutrition, time in nature, or sleep. And so while I know we've talked about a lot of potentially heavy things tonight, I did want to focus on the relief aspect and how you can maybe find relief for yourself under the sun that is the Rare Giver's Journey Map as well. And so that brings me back to that the base of that pyramid that we talked about, which is support. And that you all seem, or not all, but many of you seem to find a big need in wanting to establish support. And so support systems do matter, and that this connection and being here tonight hopefully can help reduce the heavy weight of isolation that is sometimes comes along with navigating VCP disease. And that I want to encourage you that leaning on others is strength and not weakness. And never would it be a weakness. And it takes a lot of strength to lean into the vulnerability of any emotion that you're feeling and sharing that with others. And so I would encourage you to have open communication in your family when possible, when feasible and appropriate. But that is one way you can lean into your network, is to have open communication. You can also, as we saw in the Rare Givers Journey Map, you can seek counseling and mental health support. And lastly, another way to help establish a community would be to attend the Cure VCP Disease happy hours and young adult peer support groups, which again, like I mentioned, will start next month. And so I do want to finish on saying that you are more than your risk. There is so much more to you than your risk for VCP disease, of which we saw most of you consider yourself to be at risk for. And that thriving with VCP disease in your story might mean making choices that reflect your values, your personal values, and prioritizing that and making the boundary for yourself in your own life that the choices that you make will always reflect your values. Thriving might also mean living with intention and not fear. And again, that might be something that's much easier said than done, but trying to keep that top of mind that you are planning with purpose. And you're not planning from a place of fear, you're just planning with purpose. Thriving might also look like celebrating joy, even in hard seasons. Again, this is something that could be easier said than done, but finding those moments to, as I might call them, save the day. If I've had a particularly rough day, I think I try and find a moment and be intentional in finding something that, quote unquote, save the day. It could be as small as seeing a bird that I like outside or a flower on my walk that I really enjoy. And that could be how I kind of save the day. So that is a small example, but that's a way, even in a hard season, that you could celebrate joy. Of course, there are much larger celebrations of joy as well, but finding time to celebrate joy and enjoy the joy, even in the hard season, could also help you thrive. And remembering, like I said, that you are more than your risk, which means you are more than a gene, and you are more than a diagnosis. It's just one aspect to you, your life, and your family is VCP disease. And overall, you deserve a full, meaningful life. I would argue everyone deserves this, but I want to drive this home tonight to this community, and that, we talked about a lot of ways that you could plan with purpose, and a lot of things that might have brought up some emotions for yourself. But even on this complex journey, to remember that you deserve to have a full, meaningful life. And so lastly, since I do want to make sure you're set up for success with the bottom part of that pyramid here tonight, and making sure that your support, that you're starting to build your support community, I did want to remind you of the different opportunities we have for connection in the Cure VCP disease space. So we have several happy hours that happen every month. We see the most upcoming one here is for significant others and care persons on May 6th, and that's at 8 Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific time. Then there's also a happy hour for patients and care partners and families, and that's happening May 15th. And then we will also start having those young adult peer support groups. And those will begin on Tuesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and those will happen the second Tuesday of every month, specifically for young adults. So be on the lookout in your inboxes, or for my young adults in the Discord chat or server for how to register for those.